Hello, everybody, and welcome to this month's edition of the Watch Club. We're the monthly filmmaker interview series of the Newburyport Documentary Film Festival in Massachusetts. I'm Program Director James Sullivan. We're brought to you, as always, by the Ford Hall Forum, which is the longest continuously operating public lecture series in the country. We thank them as always, and we thank you for watching and for your donations. Don't forget to subscribe and like our YouTube channel so you can get updates on our monthly interview series. And we're here today to talk about the excellent PBS American Experience film, Fly With Me, about the many ways that flight attendants in America changed the culture over 70 or so years of flying. We have the directors Helen Dobrowski and Sarah Colt with us, and I'm looking forward to speaking with them. We're just going to take a moment, as always, to take a look at the trailer for those of you who are watching who maybe haven't had a chance to watch the film yet. So here is the trailer for Fly With Me.
This is your captain speaking. We're now at cruising altitude, 35,000 feet.
Small town girls like me looked at a flight attendant and thought, that's the best job in the world.
The idea that I would get to fly around the world was just extraordinary.
Stewardesses were glamorous. It just looked like the world was theirs. And I wanted that life.
But no other job offered as much freedom with such a high cost of conformity.
Like the dinner, sir?
We were all supposed to look the same. We looked like 20 mannequins. I couldn't find myself in this photograph.
You couldn't be married, couldn't have children. They weighed you in every month. Just for 1 pound, you could be taken off a payroll. And the airline started adding the age rule, too.
When you reach the age of 32, you just want to get rid of you.
They were being marketed basically as a Barbie doll.
They were selling sex instead of safety. You had people try to squeeze past so they could feel your body.
I was the only student of color in the school. She said the airlines do not hire Negroes. I was determined that somebody of African-American heritage was going to get this job.
I don't think we realized what a revolutionary thing we were doing.
The airlines had no idea what was coming.
That moment was a turning point for me.
I said, the hell with this. Why is it okay for a pilot to marry and not a stewardess?
And I thought about it. Okay, you don't want me here? Watch this.
These were not women who were setting out to break barriers for women. They just wanted to keep their jobs. Airlines hired these women who were independent and curious, and it's amazing to me that airlines would expect that they would be a docile group.
Sarah Colt and Helen Dobrowski, co-directors of Fly With Me. Welcome to the Watch Club.
Thank you.
Thanks for being here. Sarah, it's your production company, I think, right? And Helen, you've been working with Sarah on most of the films that her production company has made, as far as I know, right? Beginning as an intern several years ago.
That's right. Starting as an intern in the early 2000s, and now we've been working together on every American Experience project since then. And it's been great. It's been a great partnership, and we were really excited to do Fly With Me because it was one of the first projects that we pitched to American Experience. That they Cameo George, the executive producer, okayed it, and we got to make the film. So it was pretty exciting for us to do that.
So you have a great list of other films that you've made about Walt Disney, which was nominated for an Emmy, right? And about the polio period well, hopefully we're not moving back into another polio period. Let's see. But anyway, so you've worked together on lots of great subjects and lots of great films. Can you tell me the basic question about where the idea for this one came about? Was there sort of like the proverbial aha moment where one of you was like just thinking about flight attendants looking at some kind of archival footage or something and going like, oh, there's a whole story there that nobody else has told yet?
Well, I was trolling my local public library, Easttown Library. I want to give it a shout out because they have a great nonfiction section. There was a book by one of our interviewees. Her name's Julia Cook. They are Come Fly the World. Right. And I saw that we had been thinking of developing some ideas to possibly pitch. And we read that book. We started to read more books. We started digging into the story and realizing that there was a lot more that we didn't think the general public really knew about the history of flight attendants and what they did for workplace equity. And so it was kind of a surprising story that we thought we could tell, shed some light on, and luckily American Experience agreed. And so Sarah and I got to do it.
So what's the name of Julia's book? And it covers basically the same ground about all of the various ways that the flight attendants changed the culture, from unionizing to, from union efforts to, fighting the sexism of the airline industry, et cetera.
Go ahead, Sarah.
Well, so it's called Come Fly the World. It's an excellent book, and it's about Pan Am specifically. Okay. And she follows several women who worked at Pan Am and talks about, touches on some of these issues, but it was really focused on Pan Am. And Helen read it and said, Sarah, I think you should read it. I read it, and we were both like, there's a lot here. We need to learn more. And so from there, we went on to read other books that did deal more directly with the work that these women did to change the way women are treated in the workplace. Mm-hmm. And there's a couple of scholarly books that were instrumental and crucial to our understanding of the subject matter. Kathleen Barry has a book. What's the title of it?
Feminism in Flight.
Right. Feminism in Flight. That was just really key. And so once we read that, it was like this, and also just dipping into the archival material, we just knew it was one of those projects where you just like everything just kind of fell into place. Like, oh, it's a great story. Nobody knows the story. The women, many of them are still alive, right. And then the archival. So it was just like the pieces of the puzzle where we knew they were there, and it was just the question of getting the go ahead to work on it.
So the books are there, the research was there, mm-hmm. But nobody else. Why had no one else thought to do it? Because obviously it's so visually striking. I mean, the archives must have been so much fun to root around in, to find all that amazing footage of old airline flights and what it looked like to fly in a plane in the late 1940s or whatever, and what the different uniform changes that the poor flight attendants had to go through in the 70s. All of that is such an amazing footage. How come nobody had done it before?
Yeah. We didn't know, but it was exciting to us. It was really exciting to us to find a subject. There's nowadays, there's so many people out there making films about every subject you can imagine. So it was pretty exciting to find something that really hadn't been explored in documentary.
Mm-hmm. Had you, you said that many of the women, most of the women, you dedicated to one of the women who did pass away, I think probably after production, mm-hmm. Dedicated the film to her memory, but most of the other women are still alive and were available to you to talk. How many of them appeared in the books that you used as resources, and how many of them did you actually sort of uncover yourselves through, newspaper archives or magazine archives and the stories that you refer to in the film?
I mean, I think I'm trying to think back where there were mentions of some of the individuals. I mean, Dusty Rhodes was pretty well known from some of the work she did, and had been mentioned in another book by Nell McShane Wolfhart, who wrote she wrote a book called The Great Stewardess Rebellion. Mm-hmm. But a number of the other ones, we spoke with, I don't even have an exact number. I mean, dozens and dozens of flight attendants, current and retired. Mm-hmm. And what we were trying to do was find the individuals who could both speak to the experience and kind of give you the nitty gritty of what the flying experience was like, the uniforms and everything, as you said, but also in some way kind of pushed things forward. Maybe went into it with thinking that the job was one thing, then realizing, well, maybe I don't want to stop when I get married, or I don't want to retire at age 35. We wanted to find the people who had those stories, and then really tried to push to change the job to be what they wanted it to be, and to be equitable with the men who were also in the same position. So it was a mix of people, and I'm sorry, my dog.
That's all right, no problem.
I'm
surprised my dogs haven't done more of that, interrupting our interview. What is the dog's name?
Rozzy.
Rozzy?
Rozzy.
Rozzy. Oh, Rozzy. I got it. Yeah,
after Roslindale.
Got it.
For people who are in Boston.
Well, we're going to get to that in a second.
Yeah.
So say hi to Rozzy for us. Give her a treat.
Thank you.
So Helen, you did just mention, it does seem like most of the women who became activists in their own various ways, did not say, they just, the beginning of the film just has these beautiful moments where the women are just saying, listen, it looked like heaven to me to be able to travel the world. The one woman who says, the ad that I answered said, would you like to have a boyfriend in every city? She said, well, yes, I would, so just the glamour of being able to travel the world at the very outset of what, people used to call decades ago, the jet set. Right. But almost all of them seem to have come to that. I mean, they all became activists of a sort. So of course they had to come to some kind of an epiphany, but it's amazing how similar their stories were. They just went to do the work because they felt it would be fun, and then realized, oh, there's a lot more depth here or a lot more that I can be doing with my life than just, enjoying flying around the world. Right.
I mean, I think that was what really attracted us to the story was, you're always looking, a good story has change and people change over time. Sure. And so, for example, Patricia Ireland, who became the president of the National Organization for Women, she had a memoir that we read. She, told the story in her book about her kind of click moment when she went from just a young woman, a smart young woman. She was married young, get out of her small town, get to, flying around, paying for her husband to get through school, basically.
Yeah.
And then realizing wait a second, I want these things. Why am I making a stake for a pilot during a potential bomb threat to my plane? Make the damn stake yourself. That's a really big turning point we were looking for people who could speak for, sort of a chorus. There wasn't just one person who was going to tell this story, but women who could together tell a universal experience. Now, this isn't to say there weren't lots of flight attendants who did do it for 2-3 years, met the man of their dreams and got married and never looked back. But there were these, obviously women come in all shapes and needs and desires. And so there were the women who really found a career as flight attendants. And then they came up against this age rule. The age rule really was the thing that got people activized, because the notion that you had, you signed something away when you were 21 and you thought 32 was never going to come. But then by 32, you wanted to still be a flight attendant.
And for those who are watching who maybe haven't had a chance to watch the film yet, there's the moment where one of the women explains how she put together a bunch of flight attendants who were in their 20s and another group who were in their 30s, and put them all together and said, tell us which one's over 32. Who's over 32 and who's under 32, right? And the answer was, well, we have no idea, right? How arbitrary is that? It's just infuriating to see that piece of the story that, the airlines decided it was 32 or 35 where it was mandatory retirement in the early years of flight attendants. And that one episode of her, having that picture taken of the women who were in their 20s and 30s really sort of just nailed it for me, Yeah.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say what was really, as a group, I think, I've said this many times, but I can generalize and say that flight attendants, we have yet to meet one that isn't incredibly fascinating and a good storyteller and a great sense of humor and very charismatic. I mean, they were hired in part, especially in the time that we're covering in the film, to be that. But Dusty really shows one of the ways in which these women were really clever. I mean, they were, I think, as Julia Cook says in the film, she's using her sexuality, her sexual appeal that's being wielded against her to actually make a point. So
Right.
there are the ways in which these women were very self-aware and very smart, and they realized, well, if we can do this with the things that we have, maybe we can actually change something. So
Right.
that was sort of like a serious thing that she was trying to change, but a very sort of humorous, accessible thing. And I mean, she called all the press. I mean, she got them together and knew that they would come and take photos of attractive women. I mean, she knew that, and she pushed for it.
Right. I'm just going to take a moment to say that for those of you who are watching live right now, if you would like to ask Helen and or Sarah a question, please do. All you have to do is type it into the chat, and I will make sure that they are aware of it. So I understand that both of you have Boston connections, right? I think, Sarah, you went to Harvard, and Helen, you went to BC. Is that right?
Yep.
Is that why you were so quick to say, yes, we'll talk to you in Newburyport?
It did feel familiar. Yeah.
Yeah. And,
We're loyal.
and we just met Rosie, named for Roslindale. So can you tell me about your college experiences, why you came to Boston for those schools, and did either of you study film?
So I grew up in Massachusetts. So going to Harvard was fairly local for me. And when I was at Harvard, I did do, people don't expect me to say this, but about a Harvard education, but I did art at Harvard.
Yeah.
And I was a photographer, a still photographer.
Sure. Yeah.
So I didn't get into film until after college. You had to kind of decide between photography and film. And so I was very excited and animated by still photography, but then moved on to documentary. So it was documentary, still photography, and then became excited about documentary film very soon after college.
I did an interview fairly recently with Ramel Ross, who made Nickel Boys, which was his feature debut, and he started as a still photographer and he studied at Brown.
Oh, okay.
So that's interesting. I mean, I'm not sure how often you hear that progression, going from still photography to, it makes perfect sense.
Right.
But, and then he went from still photography to making a great documentary, Hale County This Evening, which was beautiful. And then, and then was given the opportunity to make his first feature film. But so that's an interesting progression. I just thought it was worth mentioning. So, and Helen, does BC have, sort of a film studies program?
Yeah, no, they do. But I was a communications major, sort of trying to figure out what casting about in that big wide area of communications, what I was going to do. And I was lucky enough to have a professor, John Mahalchuk, who I think is still there, as is his wife. They're both professors there. And he teaches filmmaking courses. I got to go with him on a grant to Nicaragua, where he was making a film about a school for deaf students who were learning Nicaraguan Sign Language. So that was sort of like my, this is what I want to do for the rest of my life moment. It was really hard to break into it, but eventually, after graduating and working another job, I got the internship with Sarah, and then just stuck with her. She couldn't get rid of me after that.
No. It was more like she was an intern, and I was like, when I got my chance to make my first American experience, I was like, I need to hire this amazing person.
Which was the first American experience?
The first one was the polio crusade.
Yeah.
That I did through my own company. Before that, Helen had been an intern on a series we did that American Experience did about Native history called We Shall Remain.
Do you want to talk a little more, Sarah, about the process? So we've had lots of filmmakers who have shown their films on Independent Lens or on American Experience, with PBS in various ways. It's pretty prestigious, obviously, to be sort of a recurring filmmaker for the American Experience series in particular. How do you get your foot in the door? Like, what'd you do to get your foot in the door in the first place?
I would say that I worked for many long days and hours for another excellent filmmaker who I really call my mentor, named David Grubin, who had a company here in New York City called David Grubin Productions. Yeah. And he made he's made over 100 films for PBS, but when I was working for him, he was making mostly American experience. So I was lucky enough to train under him, work for him for many years. I worked for 7 years for David. And so I did get to know the people at American Experience through that work. And then when I went out on my own, that was when I had the opportunity to do a film that I would direct and produce for American Experience.
Mm-hmm. So back to Fly With Me for a minute. There's a moment in the film, another moment in the film that I want to bring up where one of the women says something about, or I forget who exactly says this, but it's about they were looking for women, or maybe it's, I can't remember. You tell me who it was who says this. They were looking for women whose curiosity was enormous. That's the line that I'm thinking of.
Yeah.
And I would imagine that that line itself hit home for you two because you're documentary filmmakers, and so your curiosity level is probably pretty high. Mm-hmm. Have either of you had any experience with the airline industry? Have either of you ever thought about becoming a flight attendant, or thought about taking flight lessons, or had, relatives who've been flight attendants or pilots for that matter? Did you have any prior experience with the industry?
I mean, I didn't have that, but what I think is, for me, what was so fascinating, after college, I had a traveling fellowship and I went and lived in Zimbabwe for a year after college on my own. And it was quite a life-changing experience to do that. And I think that I have this understanding of how travel can change you and can really affect the trajectory of your life. And so I think for me, the story of the flight attendants was, given the age that I am, I was born in the middle of the women's movement. So by the time I was a kid, I thought that women, I thought everything was moving in a very positive and progress was happening. And that by the time I was grown up, everything would be equal. That's, I had this idea, this great sense of progress about gender and race. And so I really look at the women in the film, and, it's really not that far away from my own age. And yet it's miles away in terms of what opportunities were there for me versus what my mother did get to go to college, but she said there were 3 options: secretary, nurse, or teacher.
Right. And
then you were really supposed to quit when you got married. And my mother, worked until she had her first child. And that was kind of progressive and, and then went back to work later. But she had no choices. And yet her daughters, there were all these choices. So I was really attracted to the women in this film.
Yeah, for sure. Helen?
No personal connection. I have an uncle who builds a plane. He has a plane that he built himself, and he pilots it and does some really cool stuff down in outside of Dallas. But no, I mean, I think I'm with Sarah, and I also just really was interested in this idea of the goal. Everybody calls it the golden age of travel, and how sort of luxurious it was, and slick and smooth, and the uniforms were fascinating. I mean, it's that kind of pop culture idea of what the stewardess is and does, and then having not really thought about it, but then really digging in and realizing there was so much going on behind the scenes of that to make that possible, but also the women who were allowed to do it, and very selective process that ruled out a lot of people, and then how much the job changed. I thought that was just fascinating to kind of really dig into that and learn from these women that weren't satisfied with the status quo.
Right. Producer Steve informs me that we have a question from a viewer, and here it is. Gina Marie says, I am a flight attendant and I have not seen the documentary yet. That's why we show the trailer. Gina, no problem. Gina Marie. Your dog's name is probably not Rosie, but your dog. Where did the idea for the film develop from? Oh, maybe. So go ahead. If you want to both kind of mention that again.
Yep. Gina Marie, I saw a book in my local library about Pan Am history and flight attendants, and Sarah read it. We really realized as we were going through this and started to read some other works on kind of specific areas of flight attendants and airline history that there was an untold story about what some of these women got together and did to change their workplace and to get and to keep their jobs.
So maybe for the benefit of Gina Marie or anyone else watching who hasn't yet seen the film, maybe we can wrap up on this. Maybe, can you? So we've touched a little bit on, and if anybody has seen anybody who has seen the film knows that you touch on so many issues, unions, obviously, feminism, and the objectification of women, and equal pay, and racism, issues of racism. But I guess the question that I'm going to ask you to maybe end on would be, which of those or anything that I did not think to mention that came up for you in terms of the issues that the women faced in your research surprised you the most?
Let me start. I would say that what I think both of us became excited and interested in was how this, again, going back to this idea of change, how the progression of going from being angry that they just couldn't keep their jobs, they just wanted the job. They were okay with these feminized jobs, to the tipping point of like, why are we being treated differently than the men who are doing the same work? And then on sort of layered in that was that race and class was so much a part of this. And so to be able to get to the latter part of the film where we can kind of start to play with these ideas of like what the white women are fighting for and how that can differ from women of color because of the way our society is made up. So the really kind of layering the complexity of the issues of women's rights and workplace equity, that was what made it feel like such an exciting topic, because there was so much to it that you could just keep digging deeper and getting more complex as you went along.
Helen, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I think, exactly what Sarah said. And also there's one historian that we interviewed in the film, Mia Bay, and she talks about how kind of surprised people are to think about there being kind of a civil rights movement of the sky. And I think we really tried to get into that. And some of the women that we interviewed who shared their stories, really powerful stories, kind of helped us see and understand that we knew that there was a civil rights movement, obviously going on the ground that many people are a part of, but they were doing that work in the air as well. So that was something that I hadn't really thought about, how far racism, where it's embedded in everything, and they were doing the work to fight it in the airline industry as well.
Right. Well, I think we're right about at time. Thanks so much for taking the time to talk to me. It's a great film. It's a lot of fun and also obviously very important. And as we said earlier, surprisingly meeting the moment, which I don't think you necessarily thought when you first started making the film, but in many ways it is. So thanks so much for making this film. We look forward to seeing what the two of you come up with next.
Thank you.
We're just going to take a quick minute to thank our sponsor again, the Ford Hall Forum, and we'll see you next month on the Watch Club. Thanks again, Helen and Sarah.
Thank you so much for having us.